The view from Sanctuary Station never got old. Taemin stood by the observation window, watching ships from 100 different worlds come and go. Some were sleek and silver. Others looked like floating crystals. A few were so strange that human eyes could barely understand their shape. After 3 generations, humanity had earned its place here among the stars. It was not a big place, but it was theirs. Taemin was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Coalition. His job was simple in theory, but hard in practice. He spoke for humanity. He made deals. He kept the peace. Most days it felt like being the smallest person in a room full of giants. Humans were not special here. They had good technology and brave explorers, but so did everyone else. The Coalition saw them as useful but forgettable. That morning everything changed. The emergency broadcast came through every channel at once. A star was dying, not in the normal way stars died, slowly over billions of years. This one was collapsing fast, and there was a planet full of people in its path. The planet was called Verath 7. The people who lived there were called the Vex. They looked like giant insects with 6 legs and hard shells that shimmered in different colors. They were not warriors or traders. They were farmers and artists. Peaceful people who had made one terrible mistake centuries ago when they tried to fix their sun. Now that mistake was killing them. The Coalition held an emergency meeting. Taemin sat in the back and listened to species after species explain why they could not help. It was too expensive, too dangerous, too far away. The Vex were too primitive to matter. Some speakers were more honest. They simply did not care if the Vex died. Taemin felt sick. He had spent years learning to play politics, to be careful with his words, to think of Earth first. But he could not stay quiet. When his turn came to speak, he stood up. His voice shook a little, but he said what he needed to say. Humanity would help. They would send ships. They would save as many Vex as possible. The room went silent. Then someone laughed. A representative from the Korth Dominion, a species that looked like walking reptiles with too many teeth. He said humans were fools. He said they would waste their resources on bugs who could not even save themselves. Other species nodded. Some looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Taemin left the meeting and made the call. Within hours, Earth's military and civilian leadership agreed. They would send everything they could spare. Captain Ji-won received her orders aboard the starship Steadfast Mercy. She was young for a captain, only 32 years old, but she had proven herself in a dozen difficult situations. When she told her crew what they were about to do, she expected arguments. Instead, they cheered. Humans had always been good at running toward danger when others ran away. The fleet that left Earth was not impressive by Coalition standards. 37 ships. Some were military vessels. Others were cargo haulers hastily converted to carry passengers. A few were private ships whose owners volunteered without being asked. It was not enough, but it was what they had. The journey to Verath 7 took 4 days. When they arrived, the situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The star was not just collapsing. It was throwing out massive waves of radiation that fried electronics and cooked anything that got too close. The Vex had some ships, but they were old and breaking down. Millions of people were still on the planet's surface waiting to die. Ji-won made a decision that would haunt her forever. She ordered her ships to fly closer to the star than was safe. They had to get everyone off the planet, and they had to do it fast. Her chief engineer, Hyun-woo, told her the shields would not hold. She told him to make them hold anyway. For 3 weeks, the human fleet worked without rest. They flew through radiation storms that melted hull plating. They dodged solar flares that could vaporize a ship in seconds. When their ships were full, they flew to the nearest safe system, dropped off the refugees, and came back for more. The Vex could not believe what they were seeing. These strange aliens with soft skin and no shells were dying to save them. The ship started failing. First, a cargo hauler called Morningstar lost its engines and had to be abandoned. The crew made it to escape pods, but the ship and its cargo of 3,000 Vex were lost. Then a military frigate took a direct hit from a solar flare. It simply disappeared, taking 200 human crew members and 5,000 Vex refugees with it. Ji-won watched her fleet die piece by piece. Every time she thought about calling a retreat, she looked at the planet below. There were still people down there. Still families hoping for rescue. She could not leave them. On the 21st day, Hyun-woo came to her with bad news. The Steadfast Mercy's reactor was failing. They could make one more trip to the surface, maybe 2 if they were lucky. After that, they would have to leave or die trying to stay. G1 ordered one final evacuation run. They packed the ship so full that Vex refugees filled every corridor, every storage room, every available space. The ship groaned under the weight. As they lifted off, the star finally began its death. The planet below started to crack and burn. They made it out with minutes to spare. Behind them, Vareth 7 died in fire and light. But they had done it. The human fleet had saved 4.2 million Vex lives. The cost was 17 ships destroyed and 843 human crew members dead. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. No one could understand why humans had done this. There was no profit in it. No strategic advantage. The Vex had nothing to offer Earth in return. It made no sense by the cold logic of galactic politics. In the refugee camps, the Vex matriarch Krisha asked to meet with Captain G1. Krisha was old, her shell scarred from a long life. She moved slowly, her 6 legs trembling with age and emotion. When G1 arrived, Krisha bowed so low that her head touched the ground. It was the highest sign of respect in Vex culture. Through a translator device, Krisha spoke. Her voice was like wind through metal pipes, musical and strange. She said that humanity had saved her people when no one else would. She said that this debt could never be repaid, but it would never be forgotten. She said that if humanity ever faced extinction, if they ever needed help that no one else would give, the Vex would answer, no matter the cost, no matter the danger. The debt would be honored. G1 did not know what to say. She had not done this for payment or promises. She had done it because it was right. But she could see that for the Vex this oath was sacred. So she bowed back and accepted the promise. The ceremony was broadcast across the entire coalition. Every species saw Krisha make her vow. Most thought it was meaningless. A primitive species making grand promises they could never keep. The Korth representative laughed openly and said that sentiment was weakness. Strength was all that mattered in the galaxy. Taman watched from Sanctuary Station and felt a chill run down his spine. He had learned to read political currents, to see danger before it arrived. And he saw something in that Korth representative's eyes that worried him. It was not just contempt, it was hatred. But for now there was celebration. Earth mourned its dead and honored its heroes. The Vex began rebuilding their civilization on a new world they called New Vareth. And in the cold calculation of galactic politics, a single fact was recorded. Humanity had proven it would sacrifice its own people to save strangers. Some species saw this as admirable. Others saw it as exploitable. The Korth saw it as weakness, and they would remember. 50 years passed like a breath. For the galaxy, it was barely a moment. For humans, it was 2 generations who grew up hearing stories of the Vareth 7 rescue.
Children learned about Captain G1 in school.
Her face was on stamps and statues. But to the wider galaxy, the rescue had become a footnote. An interesting moment of human strangeness that everyone had moved past. Taman was old now. His hair had gone white and his hands shook when he held his morning tea. But his mind was still sharp, and he still served as Earth's ambassador. He had seen a lot in 50 years. He had watched the coalition grow and change. He had seen new species join and old alliances shift. Through it all, humanity had remained steady, reliable, useful, but never threatening. That was about to change. Hei-In worked in coalition intelligence. Her job was to watch data streams and look for patterns. She was good at her work, maybe too good. 3 months ago, she had noticed something strange. Encrypted messages between the Korth Dominion and 5 other species. Messages that used old codes and hidden channels. Messages that mentioned humanity again and again. She brought her findings to Taman. He listened carefully, his old eyes narrowing as he read her reports. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he told her she was seeing shadows. The coalition had mutual defense treaties. No member species would attack another. It would mean the end of everything they had built together. Hei-In wanted to argue. She wanted to make him see the danger. But Taman was the ambassador and she was just an analyst. So she went back to her office and kept watching. The messages continued. They were getting more frequent, more urgent. Something was coming. On Earth, Commander Dongha was preparing for fleet exercises. He was Captain G1's grandson, and he had inherited her sense of duty and her stubborn refusal to give up. The exercises were routine. Boring, really. The human fleet had not seen real combat in 30 years. Most of his crew had never fired a weapon at anything but practice targets. The attack came at dawn. Earth time measured it as 600 hours on a Tuesday morning. Later, survivors would remember the day as simply Black Tuesday. The first sign was every sensor going dark at once. Then the sky above Earth lit up with weapons fire. Ships appeared from nowhere, thousands of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They had coalition markings. They had coalition technology. But they were not here to talk. Dong Ha was on duty when the orbital defense stations died. One moment they were there, solid and strong. The next moment they were debris. He grabbed the communication system and started shouting orders. Get everyone into space. Get the civilians to the shelters. Call for coalition support. But there would be no coalition support. The coalition was leading the attack. The assault was perfect, surgical, overwhelming. Every human military installation was hit in the first 10 minutes. Earth's moon bases exploded in silent flowers of fire. Mars colonies went dark as their domes were breached. The outer system stations died without even sending distress calls. Dong Ha managed to get 70 ships into space. 70 ships against 3,000. His tactical officer told him the odds. He told the officer to shut up and fight. If this was the end, humanity would face it standing up. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was not really a battle. It was a massacre. Human ships fought with everything they had, but it was never enough. For every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. Dong Ha watched his fleet die ship by ship. Watched friends and family burn. Watched everything his grandmother had fought for turn to ash. As his own ship took critical damage, he made one final transmission. He broadcast it on all frequencies, making sure every species in the coalition would hear it. His voice was calm despite everything. He said that humanity had come to the coalition in peace. They had helped when others would not. They had asked for nothing but friendship, and this was the answer. Genocide. He said that the few humans who survived would remember this. All of them would remember. Then his ship exploded and Commander Dong Ha died doing his duty. On Earth's surface, the attack continued for 3 days. Cities burned. Entire continents were hit with weapons that turned rock to glass. The attackers were not trying to conquer. They were trying to erase. By the time the assault ended, 8.3 billion humans were dead. Earth's blue oceans had turned gray with ash. The cities that had stood for thousands of years were gone. On Sanctuary Station, Taemin watched it happen. He stood at the same observation window where he had spent 50 years watching the peaceful flow of galactic traffic. Now he watched his homeworld die.
He had been wrong.
Heian had been right. He had believed in treaties and law and civilization. He had been a fool. The coalition held an emergency session. The Korth representative stood before the gathered species and explained why the attack had been necessary. Humanity had grown too influential, he said, too soft. They made other species weak with their talk of compassion and sacrifice. The galaxy needed to be strong, and strength came from power, not sentiment. Several species nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. No one spoke in humanity's defense. Taemin left the session. There was nothing more to say. He went to his quarters and wrote a message. It took him an hour to find the right words. When he was done, he sent it to a single location. New Verath, homeworld of the Vex. The message was simple. It contained 6 words and an old audio file. The words were, "The dead is called. We are dying." The audio file was from 50 years ago. It was matriarch Krisha making her promise. Then Taemin sat in his quarters and waited. He did not expect an answer. The Vex were peaceful farmers and artists. They had no military to speak of. They could not stand against the combined might of the coalition. But he had to try. He owed that much to his people, to his world, to the billions of dead who had believed in galactic civilization. On New Verath, matriarch Shavik received the message. She was Krisha's great-granddaughter, and she had grown up hearing the story of the rescue. Every Vex child learned it. How humanity had come when no one else would. How they had died to save strangers. How Krisha had sworn an eternal debt. Shavik listened to her ancestor's voice. The promise was clear, sacred, unbreakable. She called an emergency council of all Vex clan leaders. The debate lasted less than an hour. Some leaders argued that answering the call would mean the end of their species. The coalition would destroy them just as they had destroyed humanity. Others said that a people who break their sacred oaths are already dead in every way that matters. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The debt would be honored. The Vex would go to war. Across the galaxy, other species celebrated. Humanity had been removed as a factor in galactic politics. The coalition was stronger now, they said. More unified. The weak link had been cut away. The Korth warlord Vexitar held a great feast. He had led the attack personally, and now he basked in his victory. He declared that the age of sentiment was over. The age of strength had begun. His allies cheered and drank to his health, but in the shadows, Heian was working. She had survived the attack by pure chance. She had been on a deep space research station when Earth died. Now she was gathering information, making contacts, finding the scattered human survivors. There were not many. Maybe 2 million across dozens of hidden colonies and stations. Not enough to fight an empire, not enough to rebuild a civilization, but maybe enough to make the galaxy regret what it had done. She sent out a message to every human survivor she could find. The message had 3 parts. First, a list of every species that participated in the attack. Second, a reminder of what humanity had once stood for. Third, a question. What do we stand for now? The answers came back slowly. Some people wanted peace. They wanted to hide and survive and hope the galaxy forgot about them. But most people wanted something else. They wanted the galaxy to remember. They wanted the species who had done this to understand that humanity never forgets, never forgives, and never stops fighting. The war was not over. It was just beginning. The Vex fleet arrived 3 weeks after the massacre. It was not a large fleet by coalition standards. Maybe 800 ships, most of them converted cargo vessels and farming platforms. But they came. That was what mattered. Bo-Ra was in command of Mars Outpost 7 when the Vex ships appeared on her sensors. The outpost was deep underground, one of the few human facilities that had survived the attack. She had 40 people with her, 40 survivors out of billions. When she saw the Vex fleet, her first thought was that they had come to finish the job. She armed every weapon they had left and prepared to die fighting. Then she received a transmission. It was Matriarch Shavik. The Vex leader's translated voice was calm and steady. She said that the debt was being honored. She said that the Vex had come to fight, to protect, to help humanity survive. Bo-Ra did not believe it at first. No one helped for free. There was always a price. But Shavik was patient. She repeated her message and waited. Finally, Bo-Ra opened communications. What followed was the strangest alliance meeting in galactic history. The humans had almost nothing left. The Vex had never fought a war before, but they had one thing in common. They were both willing to die for this. Kiwu joined the meeting remotely from Europa Research Station. He was a scientist, not a soldier, but he had information that could change everything. Before the attack, he had been working on weapons projects that Earth's government had locked away. Technologies that were too dangerous, too cruel, too effective. The kind of weapons that civilized species did not use. Now civilization was dead, and Kiwu had the keys to humanity's darkest arsenal. He showed them what he had. Quantum disruption mines that could tear holes in space itself. Nanomachine swarms that could take apart a warship atom by atom. AI-guided weapons that moved at a fraction of light speed and could not be stopped once launched. And worst of all, biological weapons designed to target specific species. Plagues that could be programmed to kill only Korth, only Methodian, only any species that had betrayed them. Bo-Ra felt sick looking at the list. These were weapons of genocide. Using them would make humanity no better than the coalition. But they were also the only way to survive. The debate raged for hours. Some humans argued for restraint. If they used these weapons, they would lose their souls. Others said their souls were already gone, burned with Earth. All that was left was survival and revenge. Shavik listened to both sides. Then she spoke. She said that the Vex understood the moral weight of what was being discussed, but she also understood necessity. Her people had sworn to help humanity survive. If these weapons were needed for survival, then they would be used. The Vex would share in that burden and that guilt. The decision was made. Humanity would use every weapon it had, every trick, every ruthless tactic. The galaxy wanted to see them as weak. The galaxy would learn otherwise. The Vex contributed their own capabilities. They had spent 50 years developing bioengineering techniques. They could create warriors bred specifically for combat. Soldiers with enhanced strength, reflexes, and pain resistance. They also had something humans lacked: perfect coordination. Vex could link their minds together for short periods, sharing thoughts and reactions. In combat, this made them nearly impossible to surprise. Over the next month, humans and Vex worked together to create a new kind of warfare. They combined human creativity with Vex biological advantage. The result was terrifying. Small strike teams that could disable ships 10 times their size. Weapons that could be deployed silently and destroy targets weeks later. Intelligence networks that could turn enemy species against each other. The Alliance decided to test their capabilities on a small target. There was a Korth supply depot in the Outer Rim, far from any major population centers. The depot supplied 20 Korth battle groups. Taking it out would hurt the enemy and prove that humanity was not finished. Bora led the attack personally. She commanded a mixed force of human and Vex ships. The humans provided the weapons and tactics. The Vex provided the coordination and the willingness to take risks. Together, they approached the depot using a captured coalition identity code. The Korth defenses never saw them coming. The attack was over in 30 minutes. The Alliance fleet hit the depot from 4 directions at once. Quantum mines destroyed the defense platforms before they could fire a shot. Nanomachine swarms ate through the depot's shields like acid through paper. When Korth reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but wreckage and silence. The victory was small in the grand scale of the war. 1 depot destroyed, maybe 3,000 enemy soldiers killed, but the psychological impact was enormous. The coalition had believed humanity was extinct. The survivors were supposed to be scattered and broken. Instead, they were organized, armed, dangerous. Una was a communications officer who had survived the attack on Earth. She had been off-planet, visiting a human trade station, when her home died. Now she took the footage from the depot attack and broadcast it across every coalition channel she could reach. The message was simple. We survived. We remember. We are coming. The broadcast reached billions of viewers. Most dismissed it as propaganda, a desperate last gasp from a dying species. But some were not so sure. The Vex were not fighters. Everyone knew that. Yet they had destroyed a military depot like it was nothing. If the Vex could do that, what could humans do? Fear began to spread through the coalition. Small cracks appeared in their unity. Some species started to question the genocide. Had it really been necessary? Had humanity really been a threat? Or had the Korth simply wanted to eliminate competition? The Korth tried to dismiss the concerns. They sent more ships to hunt down the Human-Vex alliance. They promised swift justice. They said the problem would be solved in weeks, but weeks passed and the alliance kept striking. They hit supply lines, destroyed isolated outposts, turned safe trade routes into death traps. They used every dirty trick Kiwu could think of. Stealth weapons, sabotage, assassination. They did not fight fair because there was no such thing as fair anymore. Each victory cost them. Ships were lost. People died. The Alliance fleet was getting smaller while the Coalition's forces seemed infinite. But every attack sent a message. Humanity was not going quietly. They were not accepting their extinction. They were fighting back with everything they had, and they would take as many enemies with them as possible. On Sanctuary Station, Old Tai Min watched these developments with mixed feelings. Part of him was proud. His people were not dead yet. They were making the galaxy pay for what it had done. But another part of him mourned. This was not the humanity he had represented for 50 years. That humanity had believed in peace and cooperation. This new humanity believed in nothing but survival and revenge. He received a message from Bora. She asked him to rejoin humanity's government in exile. They needed his experience, his diplomatic knowledge, his understanding of how the coalition worked. Taman wanted to refuse. He was old and tired. He had failed his people once. Why should they trust him again? But he could not refuse. Not when humans were dying every day. Not when the Vex were sacrificing themselves for a debt they had every right to ignore. He sent back a single word. Yes. The alliance was growing stronger. More organized. More deadly. They had proven they could hurt the coalition. Now they needed to prove they could survive long enough to win. The war was just beginning. But already the galaxy was starting to fear what humanity had become. The coalition had wanted to eliminate weakness. Instead, they had created a nightmare, and that nightmare was coming for them all. 18 months. That was how long the war burned across the galaxy. 18 months of violence that made the initial attack on Earth look civilized by comparison. The Human Vex Alliance fought like they had nothing to lose because they truly had nothing left to lose. Death was certain. The only question was how many they could take with them. The Alliance did not try to hold territory. They could not. They were too few and too weak for conventional warfare. Instead, they became ghosts, striking from nowhere, destroying targets that should have been impossible to reach, disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The Coalition called them terrorists. The humans called it survival. Bora led many of these attacks personally. She was not the same woman who had opened communications with the Vex fleet. That woman had still believed in rules and mercy. This woman believed in results. When her intelligence team identified a Korth civilian supply convoy, she did not hesitate. She ordered the attack. The convoy was destroyed. Thousands of Korth civilians died. She felt nothing. The galaxy was horrified. How could the humans do such things? How could they target civilians? The hypocrisy was stunning. 8 billion human civilians had been killed and the galaxy had celebrated. Now a few thousand Korth died and suddenly it was a war crime. Una made sure everyone saw that hypocrisy. She took footage of the convoy attack and edited it together with footage of Earth burning. She broadcast the comparison across every channel. Her message was simple: this is what you taught us. This is what mercy gets you. You wanted us dead for being soft. Now you will learn what we are like when we are hard. The Coalition started to fracture. 3 species formally withdrew their support for the Korth-led offensive. They said the war had gone too far, that humanity's response proved they were dangerous, yes, but maybe there could be negotiations, peace talks, some kind of settlement that did not end in mutual extinction. The Korth refused. Warlord Vextar was not interested in peace. His pride had been wounded. His military reputation was being destroyed by a handful of survivors and their insect allies. He could not accept peace. He needed total victory, so he rejected every diplomatic overture and promised to hunt the Human Vex Alliance to the last individual. 5 more species declared neutrality. They would not fight for humanity, but they would not fight against them either. The Coalition's united front was gone. In its place was suspicion and fear. Species that had once trusted each other now wondered if their ally might be the next to betray them. Nari worked in the shadows, making this fracture worse. She was a human diplomat who had been off-world during the attack. Now she used her contacts and knowledge to turn Coalition species against each other. A leaked document here, a falsified communication there. Nothing that could be traced back to her, but everything designed to create chaos. She was good at her job. Too good. Within 6 months, 4 Coalition species were on the brink of war with each other. The Alliance did not have to destroy the Coalition. The Coalition was destroying itself. But none of this mattered to Vextar. He assembled a massive fleet, 3,000 warships from a dozen species. He would end this war personally, find the Human Vex Alliance's main base, destroy it, kill every last survivor. Then he would restore order to the Coalition under Korth leadership. The Alliance learned of the fleet through their intelligence network. They knew they could not fight it directly. 800 ships against 3,000 was not a battle. It was suicide. But Matriarch Shavik and the human commanders had been planning for this moment. They had one weapon left. One final gambit that would either save them or doom the entire region of space. They called it Operation Fallen Angel. The plan was insane. They would lure Vextar's fleet into the Sendris Nebula. The nebula was a massive cloud of ionized gas that disrupted sensors and communications. Perfect for an ambush. But the ambush would not use conventional weapons. Instead, they would use quantum disruption mines. Hundreds of them. Enough to destabilize space itself. Kiwu explained the risk. The quantum mines did not just destroy ships. They created temporary singularities, tiny black holes that appeared for fractions of a second, but could consume anything nearby. Using this many mines at once would leave permanent scars on reality. The Sendris Nebula would be uninhabitable for centuries, maybe forever. It was an environmental catastrophe waiting to happen. The Alliance voted to proceed anyway. They had tried to survive without destroying the galaxy. It had not worked. Now they would do whatever was necessary. The Battle of Burning Sky began on a cold morning by station time. The Alliance fleet entered the nebula and made themselves visible. They sent taunting messages to Vextar, challenging his courage, questioning his honor. It was obvious bait. Vextar took it anyway. His pride would not let him refuse. The Korth fleet entered the nebula in perfect formation. They were confident, organized, prepared for any conventional ambush. They were not prepared for what actually happened. The Alliance fleet lured them deep into the nebula's heart, deeper than was safe, deeper than was sane. Once Vextar's forces were fully committed, Shavik gave the order. Every Alliance ship activated their quantum mines at once. Hundreds of mines, thousands. More than should have existed in the entire galaxy, space screamed. That was what survivors said later. They could hear space itself scream as it was torn apart. The quantum mines detonated in sequence, creating a cascade of singularities. The Korth fleet simply ceased to exist. Ships were pulled into temporary black holes and crushed. Others were torn apart by gravitational shear. A few tried to escape, but the singularities were forming faster than they could jump to faster than light speed. Vextar's flagship lasted 30 seconds longer than the rest, long enough for him to understand what was happening, long enough to realize he had been beaten, long enough to feel fear. Then his ship was pulled into a singularity and destroyed. In those 30 seconds, 2,847 coalition warships were destroyed. The largest fleet ever assembled by the Korth Dominion was gone. But victory came at a price. The singularities did not discriminate. They consumed Alliance ships too. 493 vessels were lost. Nearly all the Vex warriors bred for combat. Tens of thousands of crew members who had survived everything else. Boraz's ship was one of the ones that made it out. Barely. Her hull was breached in 17 places. Her reactor was failing. Half her crew was dead. But she was alive. They had won. The Korth military was broken. The war was effectively over. As the surviving Alliance ships limped away from the battlefield, Kiwu analyzed the nebula. What he found made him weep. The quantum disruptions had not faded like they were supposed to. They had merged, grown. The Sendris Nebula was now home to dozens of permanent spatial anomalies. No ship could safely enter the area. No life could exist there. They had carved a scar into the universe that would last for millions of years. Shavik stood beside him and looked at the readings. She said nothing for a long time. Finally, she spoke. In Vex culture, there was a concept called the price of breathing. It meant that every action had consequences. Every survival had costs. They had paid the price for their survival. Now they would have to live with what they had done. News of the battle spread across the galaxy in hours. The coalition leadership was stunned. The Korth Dominion was in chaos. Without their military might, they were just another species. Smaller species that had been under Korth control started declaring independence. The coalition structure that had lasted for centuries was collapsing. The remaining coalition species sent peace envoys to the Human-Vex Alliance. They wanted to negotiate, to end the war before more damage was done. They promised trials for the species who had participated in the genocide. They promised reparations. They promised anything to make it stop. The Alliance considered their offer. They had proven their point. They had made the galaxy fear them. They had avenged Earth. But they had also lost so much. So many ships, so many people, so much of their own humanity. Was revenge worth it? Had they won, or had they just become the thing they hated? Taman spoke at the council meeting. He was very old now, barely able to stand, but his voice was clear. He said that they had to choose what humanity would become. Would they be defined by what was done to them, or by what they chose to do next? Vengeance was earned, justice was deserved, but at some point they had to stop destroying and start rebuilding. Otherwise, the galaxy had won after all. They had killed humanity's soul even if they could not kill humanity's body. The vote was close. In the end, the Alliance agreed to peace talks. But they would negotiate from strength, not weakness. They would demand justice. They would demand change. And they would never forget what had been done. The war was over, but its echoes would shake the galaxy for generations to come. The war ended not with treaties or celebrations, but with exhaustion. Both sides were bled dry. The Human-Vex Alliance had survived, but survival felt hollow when so few remained to celebrate it. Humanity's population had fallen from 14 billion to less than 2 billion. The Vex had lost 30% of their species. Entire generations of warriors bred for combat were gone. Ships that could never be replaced lay scattered across dead space. Earth was being restored. Slowly. Painfully. The oceans were still gray with ash. The cities were still ruins. But people were returning, building new homes on the bones of the old, planting gardens in the scorched soil. Life was stubborn. It found a way even when logic said it should not. The Galactic Coalition was dissolved. No one trusted it anymore. In its place, a dozen smaller federations emerged. Some were based on shared culture, others on mutual defense. None of them included the Korth. The Dominion had been broken into 17 separate territories, each governed by former subject species who had no love for their old masters. Justice, the humans called it. Revenge, the Korth called it. The distinction did not matter much. Trials were held for the species and individuals who had participated in the genocide. Some were public, broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to see. Others were quiet, held in small rooms with only witnesses who had earned the right to be there through their suffering. The trials took years. Some defendants showed remorse. Most did not. They had been following orders, they said, doing what was necessary for galactic security. The same excuses used by war criminals throughout history. Sentences were harsh. Execution for military leaders. Exile to dead worlds for political leaders. Financial reparations that would take centuries to pay. The galaxy watched and wondered if this was justice or simply more violence dressed in legal clothing. The humans did not care what it was called. They needed to see consequences. They needed the galaxy to understand that genocide had a price. But Bora could not watch the trials. She had led too many attacks, killed too many civilians, made too many choices that haunted her dreams. She stood on the observation deck of Mars Outpost 7 and looked at the stars. They looked the same as they had before the war, beautiful, infinite, uncaring. She wondered what Captain G1 would think of her. The woman who had risked everything to save strangers. Would she be proud of her granddaughter? Or horrified? Suman found her there. Suman was young, barely 25. She had been a child when Earth burned. Now she was a philosopher, trying to make sense of what humanity had become. She had written a book that was causing controversy across human settlements. The book asked a simple question. Can a species survive if it defines itself solely by trauma and retribution? Bora had read the book. She hated it, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. Suman spoke gently. She said that Bora had done what was necessary, that the Alliance had survived because of decisions like the ones Bora made. But necessity was not the same as righteousness. Survival was not the same as victory. They had won the war. Now they had to win the peace. And that meant deciding what humanity stood for when the guns were silent. Bora asked the question that kept her awake at night. Were they still human? After everything they had done? After the civilians they killed and the weapons they deployed and the permanent scars they left on the universe? Or had the galaxy succeeded after all? Had they killed humanity's soul even if they could not kill humanity's body? Suman did not have an answer. No one did. It was a question each human would have to answer for themselves. The Human-Vex Concordat formed 6 months after the war ended. It was not just a military alliance. It was a new kind of government. A federation based on the principle that debts mattered, that promises mattered, that species who honored their commitments would be protected, and species who broke them would face consequences. Other species began to approach the Concordat. Some came because they genuinely respected what humans and Vex stood for. Others came because they were afraid. They had seen what happened to the Korth. They did not want to be next. The Concordat accepted both types of members, but they never forgot the difference. Trust had to be earned over generations. Fear only lasted until something scarier came along. Daejung was assigned to create the Concordat's diplomatic corps. He was young, only 28, but he had the right background. His ancestor was Captain G1. His training was in both military tactics and cultural studies. Most importantly, he understood that diplomacy was about more than making deals. It was about building relationships that could survive disagreement and conflict. His first assignment was symbolic. He was to travel to the ruins of Varath 7, the dead world where humanity's story with the Vex began. The planet was still there, a burned husk orbiting a collapsed star. Nothing lived there anymore. Nothing could. But it mattered. History mattered. Daejung stood on his ship and looked at Varath 7 through the observation port. Matriarch Shavik stood beside him. She was older now, her shell dulled by time and stress, but her mind was still sharp. She told him the story of the rescue as her grandmother Krisha had told it to her. How the human ships had come when no one else would. how they had died to save strangers, how that single act of compassion had changed everything. Dae-jung asked if she regretted it. Honoring the debt. Going to war. Losing so many of her people. Shavik was quiet for a long time. Then she said that regret was a luxury for species who had choices. The Vex had made a promise. Breaking it would have been easier, safer, but it would have killed something essential. A promise kept was worth any price. Even this one. On Earth, a monument was being built. It took 3 years to complete. When it was finished, it stood where the Coalition embassy had once been. A massive structure of quantum crystal that would last until the heat death of the universe. On its surface were carved 8.3 billion names. Every human who died in the genocide. Every child and parent and friend and stranger. All of them remembered. All of them honored. Below the names was a message. It was written in every known language, human, Vex, Korth, even species that no longer existed. The message had 3 parts. Humanity never forgets. Humanity never forgives. But humanity will always help those who cannot help themselves. The monument was controversial. Some called it a warning. Others called it a threat. A few called it a promise. It was all 3. A reminder that humanity's capacity for compassion was matched only by their capacity for retribution, that they would help the helpless but destroy those who preyed on the weak. That debts would be honored and betrayals would be punished. Centuries passed, slowly, painfully. Humanity rebuilt. The population grew back to 5 billion. 10 billion. The scars remained, but life continued. New generations were born who only knew the genocide as history. Old wounds faded, some of them anyway. Then came the new crisis, a threat from beyond known space, a species that called themselves the Devourers. They consumed worlds, entire civilizations. They did not negotiate or trade. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed what was left. They were coming, and they were coming fast. The galaxy panicked. Every species remembered what happened when they faced extinction alone. The old federations that had replaced the coalition were too weak to mount a defense. Too divided, too afraid. They needed leadership. They needed someone who knew how to fight impossible odds. They needed the Concordat. Ambassador Sang-ho stood before a gathering of galactic leaders. He was Taiman's great-great-grandson, and he carried his ancestors' diplomatic skill along with the harder lessons learned since then. The other species looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. They remembered what humanity had done during the war. They remembered the weapons, the tactics, the permanent scars on reality itself. A Korth representative spoke. The Korth were different now, humbled, scattered, no longer the proud empire they had been, but still arrogant enough to demand rather than ask. He said the Concordat owed them help, that humanity had destroyed the coalition and needed to fix what they broke. Sang-ho looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, patient, but there was steel underneath. He said that humanity owed them nothing. The galaxy had tried to genocide them, had celebrated their near extinction. The Concordat existed despite the galaxy, not because of it. They had no obligation to help species who had shown them only hatred and betrayal. But, he continued, humanity would help anyway, not because of what the galaxy deserved, because of what humanity chose to be. They would not let their trauma define them forever. They would not become the monsters the galaxy had feared. They would help because protecting the innocent was who they were. That was humanity's true power. That was the debt they owed to themselves. The Concordat fleet mobilized. Ships from dozens of species, human technology, Vex coordination, weapons that could shake the foundations of space itself if needed. But this time they hoped diplomacy would work, that the Devourers could be reasoned with, that another war could be avoided. And if diplomacy failed, then the galaxy would see what the Concordat had learned, that sometimes compassion required strength, that mercy required the ability to be merciless, that the only way to protect the weak was to be strong enough to terrify the strong.